Chilling tales for dark nights.
The following performance is a third-round entry in the 2017 Evil Idol voice acting competition. Voting is simple. Following the performance, simply click the thumbs up icon on this video if you'd like them to become a member of the team, or the thumbs down if you'd rather they not. Voting on this entry will conclude 1 week after the date of its posting. Good luck to all of our contestants.
The same monotonous routine each day, every day, dragging you closer towards insanity. A summation of life in solitary confinement. It's like being buried alive in a concrete tomb, or as some inmates would say, being locked in a gas station bathroom 23 hours a day. I lived that life for 5 excruciatingly long years. Hell on goddamn earth. A violent crime sent me to prison, and an even more egregious act landed me in solitary. An inmate had stolen a bag of coffee from me, worth all of $3. Prison is a different world, with a more barbaric code of conduct. I had no choice but to assert myself. I confronted the thief a week later and stabbed him repeatedly with a homemade knife fashioned from a dinner tray. It was a miracle he survived. Even I was thankful for that. As punishment for my act of retribution, 3 years were tacked onto my sentence, and I was placed in indefinite segregation, meaning the administration would only release me once they felt I was no longer a threat to institutional security. Their words, not mine. The prison system was fucked up, but so was I. I'll never forget the first time I walked into the solitary unit. It's a memory I can't seem to escape from. Inmates banging against steel doors, hollering at the top of their lungs until their voices grew hoarse. The smell of feces, overpowered only by the scent of despair. Even the guards looked sickly and frail, as if the environment had poisoned them. Shackled in leg irons and handcuffs, and escorted by 2 guards, I was led into cell 13A. It was a barren room with nothing but a concrete bed and a stainless steel toilet. The window was a thin slit of frosted glass obscuring the outside world from view. As the door slammed behind me, I was left with my thoughts. Nothing more, nothing less. For months, I thought I could not be broken, until I was. Isolation wreaks havoc on your mental state. Even the strongest men will crumble. My lowest moment came laying face down in a cell, feces covering the walls, chemical spray burning my eyes, and several officers forcefully restraining me. Around that time, during a sleepless winter night, I saw him for the first time. A majority of the inmates were heavily medicated, sleeping through the night without issue. Now and again, as a small act of defiance, I'd feign taken my prescriptions. This would leave me wide awake, unable to ward off the intrusive thoughts and hard questions. Painful but necessary. At night, the prison assigned a single guard to conduct rounds in solitary every 15 minutes. Guards would often stretch this to an hour, hoping inmates would take the chance to hang themselves. The night shift was only given to veteran employees who'd earned a break from the madness. Younger staff weren't gifted that privilege. On this particular night, the guard was not someone I recognized. A highly unusual event that immediately piqued my curiosity. The guard was gangly and tall, well over 6 feet. His clothes were much too small, stretching high above his elbows and knees. Prison was about order and uniformity even for the guards. This man was anything but. Firmly pressed against the wall, he stalked through the unit cloaked in shadow, meandering about. He eventually headed towards an inmate named Skitz's cell. Fingers like branches caressing against the steel bars. I strained my neck to see more. The confines of my cell severely restricting my view. Contorting into an uncomfortable position, I saw the guard bent over, firmly grasping Skitz's outreached hands. Mournful chanting echoed softly as they swayed back and forth with hypnotic precision. Hours later, the guard stepped back and crept past my periphery. Panic-stricken, I crawled towards the corner of my cell, fearing he'd pass. Some primal instinct was begging me to hide. I was in no position to disagree. For the rest of the night, I hid, motionless, praying for the first time in years. Only when the first rays of sunshine splashed through the fogged windows and the breakfast trolleys squeaked through the unit did I move. That morning, I ate in silence and watched as the paramedics rushed into Skitz's cell. Blood pooled outwards as he was taken away on a gurney, limbs dangling loosely at the sides. It took the inmate workers an entire day to clean the mess left behind. Their labored grunts a sigh of difficult work. Several days later, I overheard the porters discussing the incident amongst themselves in hushed tones. Apparently, Skitz had gone crazy, drawing strange symbols and scenes of death with his own blood, some remarkably detailed. From their telling, every square inch of the cell was covered, even places that you would think would be unreachable. Most horrifying, they discovered his scrotum floating wistfully in the toilet. Skitz had castrated himself. In my cell, I felt like a calf destined for the slaughter. Every day, I'd pace back and forth, replaying the events of that night. Every night, I'd lay awake, shaking with fear, peering intently through the darkness. Sleep became increasingly rare, coming only for a few hours in the afternoon. Large bags formed under my eyes, and I became even more sedentary, rarely moving from my bed. On the eve of a large thunderstorm, the night guard returned. Sauntering into the cell block, he strode purposefully towards the upper tier. I watched in full view as he ascended the stairs, gliding forward with surprising speed. Each crackle of lightning bathed him in light, if only for a moment. His skin was ashen white, limbs were unnaturally elongated, and his face remained in shadow even when the lightning struck. On the upper tier, he walked back and forth methodically, stopping periodically to peer into his cell. His movements were silent. Not even the slightest patter of feet could be heard. After what felt like a lifetime, he grasped onto the bars of the last cell on the tier. Filthy Frank. Frank was a semi-successful rapper who, after a night of smoking PCP, had stabbed his girlfriend 74 times believing she was the devil. He even cut out her heart and consumed it. Years later, he would tell a documentary crew it tasted like roasted beets. The next morning, I watched as the officers cut Filthy down from a noose, his body collapsing onto the concrete. Large swaths of skin had been ripped away, muscle and bone clearly visible underneath. The cell was covered in markings, although I was unable to make out the details. And most disturbing of all, the noose coiled around his neck was fashioned from his own intestines. Months went by without a sighting. All the while I waited in fear. I refused to leave my cell, afraid of what I might see. On the rare occasion I was given a mirror, I hardly recognized the face staring back at me. A scraggly beard hanging from gaunt cheeks, lips chapped and bleeding, acne ridden. These were now my defining features, far from the man I once was. 6 months after Filthy's death, a brutal wave of violence swept through the prison. More inmates were stabbed in a 1-month period than the previous 2 years combined. It was a bloodbath. Despite all the security measures, solitary was not immune to this trend. 7 inmates were viciously attacked in my unit, and unfortunately, one of them passed away. With all other options exhausted and the prison unable to quell the violence, the warden ordered a lockdown. During a lockdown, movement is heavily restricted, with a majority of inmates confined to a cell 24 hours a day. All privileges were stripped away. Most painfully, visits from friends and family. For those of us in solitary, it didn't change much. But for the rest of the prison, life had become drastically worse. A week after the lockdown was instituted, a handful of eerily similar murder-suicides occurred. Several inmates in Cell House B had torn open their cellmates' chest cavities with their bare hands. Teeth marks were found on the lungs and hearts, which had been stuffed back into the victims' anuses. The perpetrators died just as gruesome of death, gouging out their eyes before slowly sawing their throats with a dull blade. After the murders, the news media went into a frenzy. Reporters descended onto the prison from all over the world. A public outcry soon followed, deriding the barbaric treatment of inmates and the stark living conditions. With pressure from multiple fronts, prison officials were forced to institute major policy changes. In the wake of these changes, I was released from solitary and allowed to serve the remainder of my sentence in general population. 2,144 days after leaving solitary, my prison sentence ended. A day I thought I'd never live to see. A bright, cheerful sun greeted me as I took my first steps as a free man. It was a moment of cathartic release, slightly diluted by my own melancholy. There's a saying in prison: if you look back, you'll come back. Inmates swear by it. To gaze forward is to accept a new future, to leave the past in the past. Unfortunately, the past still had a hold on me. I look back. Peering down from a guard tower was the night guard, a sight I almost expected. Bathed in sunlight, it was the first time I saw him completely unobscured. His face was a patchwork of decaying skin, all different shades and tones crudely stitched together. Perched on his forehead, a semicircle of eyes blinking at various speeds. Rows of teeth peeked behind thin, black lips pursed into a smile. I recognized the tattoos from some of the murdered men adorning his bodies. Gruesome trophies. With a final wave, his body melted into the shadows and disappeared from sight. Stifling tears, I shuffled towards an awaiting van, ready to take me back home. I may have left prison, but it has certainly not left me. Some scars cut too deep to ever heal. Manic episodes, panic and anxiety attacks, insomnia, depression, these are just a few of the things I carry with me to this day. Worst of all, my dreams are now host to an unwelcome visitor who has made himself quite comfortable feasting on my fears. You know, it's true what they say. Prison does change you.
Thank you for listening. If you haven't already, don't forget to cast your vote for this contestant via either a thumbs up or thumbs down vote, and help decide who becomes the next evil idol. In the meantime, turn off the lights and turn on the dark.
Chilling tales